Today we're going to be learning Shabbat Daf Kufbet. Today's daf is dedicated by Anushka Adler in honor of her mother, Valerie Adler, a lover of Jewish learning and Jewish life, who has taken on studying Daf Yomi, and you're her biggest role model. And also by Kay Weinberger, in loving memory of her mother, Ava Redstone, Chava Bat Chaim V'Sara Zichrona Levarcha, on her 20th yahrzeit. We're going to start right now at the top of Kufbet Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. We're going to finish the 11th parak and start the 12th parak today. Hazorek, there's a very strange Mishnah. We're going to have a lot of issues with this Mishnah. Okay, there's a sheet up. You can check on the site. I will stick it up in the chat here right now. If you look at the Mishnah, we're going to start out, and already we're going to have a problem with the first line of the Mishnah. It's not going to make a lot of sense, and the Gemara is going to try to make sense out of it. So we have a case here. The Mishnah starts off with our classic, we're still in the middle of throwing items in public. Hazorek, and the whole idea is throwing it 4 amot. If you throw something 4 amot, when it lands past 4 amot, you're going to be obligated. Hazorek, v'nizkar me'achar sheyatzta miyado. The other thing you have to remember is, in general, everything we keep talking about in Masechet Shabbat, we're talking about a scenario where you were unwitting about it. You didn't realize it was Shabbat, or you didn't realize it was forbidden to do this. So you did it not knowing. But then after it left your hands, and here becomes a very interesting, if you think about it, I'm trying to think of the word, but if you think about it from a standpoint of a ma'asev, an action, I'll explain to you what I want to say because I can't think of the word, but maybe just a theoretical kind of argument here or thought, which is you throw it. After it leaves your hands, all of a sudden, you remember that it's Shabbat, or you remember that it's usher to throw, that it's forbidden, but it hasn't yet landed on the ground. Okay, here's where the Mishnah gets strange. Now, you would think it would say, and you remember after it left your hands. Now, what do you assume the next step's going to be? And then it lands, right? And now the question is, you obligated or not? Because in the middle, remember, you're only obligated if you're shogeg. But in this case, you were mazid in the middle. So again, we always have this split between, we have the akira, the uprooting was done b'shgaga, but the hanacha, the landing, was done b'mezid. Or maybe not, because you threw it, and when you let go, basically, that's as if you're finished at this point. You have no, even though you know now that it's forbidden. I was thinking about a kid falling down the steps, and you're far away, and you see your kid rolling down the steps, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're too far to be able to help. So it's that kind of moment where you can't do anything about it. So the question is, does the fact that you now know it's forbidden have any effect on when it actually lands? Theoretically, it sounds like maybe it shouldn't, because you have no chance, you have no ability to prevent what's about to happen. So that almost sounds like it's going to be the question. However, the Mishnah takes a sharp turn here and starts talking about something else. And then it says, kalta acher, if someone else then catches it, or, right, which would then be a case of shnaim shasua, the hanacha happened by the hands of somebody else, or kalta kelev, or a dog catches it, o shenisrefa, or it's burned, falls into a fire. And now, what's the problem with these actions? So, kalta acher, Rashi says, that's a case of shnaim shasua. 2 people doing 1 malacha, you're not going to be obligated. Now, notice that they don't make any reference at all to the mazid issue. It almost switches topics, and it's no longer talking about, it's all talking about there's something missing here from your action. What happened? Either someone else actually put the item down because they caught it, or what's wrong with the dog? Rashi says something strange here. Rashi says, Osha kalta b'fiv, de lo havya hanacha de be'ina makom arba'a upatur. He says, in order for it to land, it has to land on something that's 4 by 4 tvachim wide. Okay, now why is this strange? Well, we've been learning about throwing and landing and all that, and no one's mentioned this until this point. In fact, the Ramban says about, I don't understand what Rashi is talking about. It never says anywhere that something has to land on a space of 4 by 4. He says, I don't know where Rashi gets this from. And in fact, Rashi on Daf Pei talks about having a frisbee catch with your dog, okay, something like that. And he says, he doesn't exactly talk about a frisbee catch, but he says when you throw something to your dog, if your dog jumps up and catches it, then it doesn't land exactly where you intended. And that's the problem with the dog catching it, that the dog moves. So it's unclear exactly what the reason is, but there's various options as to why. Either it didn't land in a place that's significant enough, a 4x4, or the dog, again, jumped up to catch it from somewhere, or it got burned on its way down, which means there's really no hanacha because it burned. So all those cases, you're going to be exempt. But again, we still have to figure out why did we start with this issue of mazid, that all of a sudden you remembered in the middle. What does that have to do with anything? We're going to see a number of different interpretations. You can look on the chart already on the sheet. There's going to be 4 interpretations of this mission. Zarak lasot chabura. Let's say you throw something at somebody. Now, to injure someone on Shabbat, let's say make a cut in their skin and cause them to bleed, is forbidden on Shabbat. So if you throw a rock, let's say, to hit somebody, bein ba'adam, bein b'behema, whether you're throwing at a person or an animal, v'nizkar ad shelo naseh chabura. Now, again, left your hand, it's on its way to injure. If you all of a sudden remember, now here, it actually finishes the thought, not like it did in the first sentence. It says patur, even though it left your hands already and there's nothing you could do. Now we actually see you're exempt because in the end, before it injured, you had knowledge that this was forbidden and therefore it's not considered shogeg. And now they tell you zehaklal, kol chayav, this is the rule, kol chayavei chataot einam chayavin ad shetehei tchilatan v'sofan shgaga. In order to be chayav a sin offering, it has to be that the beginning and the end have to be, you have to be unwitting about it. Now, tchilatan v'sofan you could read in 2 ways. You could read as the whole time, or you could read as the beginning and the end. It doesn't really matter what happens in the middle. We'll get back to this soon. Tchilatan shgaga v'sofan zadon. So if you start out shgaga, like our case, but then you ended and you knew what you were doing, or tchilatan zadon, or at first you knew it was forbidden, then sofan shgaga, but by the time the act was finished, you forgot. Pturin ad shtei tchilatan v'sofan shgaga. You need for both to be shgaga. So now the Gemara asks us, but wait a minute. It sounds like hanacha, if it were to have landed, we're back to case number 1. If you throw it, and then you remember after it left your hands, all of a sudden you remember, and it actually lands where you intended for it to land, sounds like you'd be chayav, because it only says if a dog or someone else caught it or something else happened to it, then you'd be exempt. It sounds like if it just landed where you intended, you'd be chayav. V'halo nizkar, except you remembered. So how could this possibly be? Utnan, and it says in our Mishnah, kol chayavei chataot ein chayavin ad shtehei tchilatam v'sofan shgaga. So Amar Rav Kahana, first answer, seifa atan lelachta umatna. When it says in the last part that it has to be beginning and end shgaga, what they mean is if it's attached to you with a cord and a bolt. Okay, so you basically have a string around your wrist, and it's the item is attached to the string. You throw it. Now, why is that important? Because remember, I said there's a problem with this whole case. If I can have no effects, my kid's falling down the steps and I can't stop them, so I have nothing to do with that act whatsoever other than I see it happening. Likewise, when I throw it, once it left my hands, there's nothing I can do about it. So if I remember in the middle, that should have no effect on anything. So therefore, comes Rav Kahana and says, when does it have effect? It has effect if I can still pull it back. And then we're going to say, if it were to have landed, I'd be obligated. Because since I didn't pull back and I let it land, I had something to do with that part of the act. But if that act would have happened anyway, no matter what happens, then my having knowledge once it left my hands doesn't really make any bit of a difference. Still, my whole act was done in an act of unwittingness because I just threw it. And even if I found out later, I couldn't have affected anything. So that sounds like a good answer, except they say like this, Lachta umatna ogdo biadohu. What's the problem? If it's still in your hands, well then, what are we obligating you for? Hotza'ah, for carrying something into a different domain. If it's still attached to me by a string, I haven't really brought it into another domain. Because to put it in another domain means it's in that domain. And if I can pull it back at any second, well, then it's not really in another domain. So that can't be the case. So the Gemara says, well, maybe Rav Kahana said lalachta umatne, he was talking about the next case. Maybe he says kigon sheniskaben lasot chabura. Now, this would be a good case because even if it's still attached to me, if it actually injures someone, it doesn't really make a difference that it's still attached to me. And yet, it would matter if I found out in the middle I was mazy. So I throw a rock at you. It's still attached to me with a string. When I throw it, after I let go, I remember all of a sudden that it's Shabbat. So if I don't pull back, then theoretically, I am intentionally hurting you when I hurt you. So therefore, that must be the case that he said, lachto matna. So then they say, well, then there's a repetition in the Mishnah because the second case is talking about it has to be shogeg all the way. And then the last line, hanami tanina, in other words, if we're saying the last line, the whole thing was to explain why it says, so they say that must be coming to explain about a chabura. But then they say, Hanami Tanina, that already says it explicitly in the Mishnah. Hazorek lasot chabura, bein ba'adam, bein be'behema, v'nizkar ad shelo naseh chabura patur, where it kind of explains that, and then you wouldn't need two lines to be telling you the same thing. Ela amar Rava, so Rava gives a different explanation. He says, b'ma'avir. There's two cases, and this goes back to what I said, created a theoretical problem in the beginning, which is the first case seemed like if it landed, you'd be obligated, which seemed to contradict the second part, which talked about it all depends on what whether you knew or didn't know. So they say, if you're zorek and you remember in the middle, it doesn't make a difference. You're still going to be obligated because it left your hands and you have zero control. So that's the first case. When it says later, zeh klal, you have to be shogeg also at the end, that's talking about when you're actually carrying it. If you're carrying it, and while you're carrying it and you're walking, you realize that it's Shabbat, then you can stop yourself. And at that point, when you get to the 4 amot, you're mazid, then you're not going to be obligated. So he basically says the first part's talking about zorek, which actually matches the wording. And the second part is talking about ma'avir. What's the problem with this? The problem is it doesn't really sound like that's what the Mishnah is saying. Because v'ha klal katane azrika katane. Klal is coming to explain what was mentioned earlier. So it sounds like it's talking about throwing. And therefore, it's not a good answer. So let's try a third answer. In the first two, and if you look at the chart, you can see the way I charted it out. Each answer has problems with it, except that the Gemara raises problems with the first two. The Gemara doesn't raise problems with the second two, but I brought a list of some potential problems with the next two. Ela amarava, tarte katane. Rava says the Mishnah is actually talking about, in the first line of the Mishnah, they're talking about two different cases. Hazorek v'nizkar, me'achar sheyatzta miyado. Number one, you threw it, and then you remembered in the middle that it was forbidden. And then, even though it left your hand, right, and you have no control over it, you're still going to be exempt. Because in the end, when it lands, it doesn't matter that you have no control, like your kid falling down the steps, you have no control, it doesn't matter. You still, okay, now it's not exactly the same as your kid falling down the steps, because in this case, you did something to cause it, right? You threw it. Now, you started the action, but when the action finished, even though you had no control over it, still when the action finished, you had knowledge and you knew it was Shabbat, therefore you're not considered shogeg. Inami, the second case with the dog or the fire or someone else catching it has nothing to do with you remembered in the middle. It's just another case where you're exempt. Lo nizkal, right? You didn't remember that it was forbidden to do. Vik kalta acher o kalta kelev, and somebody catches it, or a dog catches it, or ocean israfa, or it burns on its way down. Patur, then you're exempt. So basically, the Mishnah is bringing up two totally different cases. What's the problem with this interpretation? Well, first of all, if you didn't have that one line about the dog, it would almost sound like it's clearly not the topic of our Mishnah. Topic of our Mishnah, all around it, before, after, right? It's all about if you all of a sudden find out that you're mazy. So it doesn't really belong here if you say that. And the sentence sounded like it was giving you one case and not two different tracks of cases. It's also a problem. And it also sounds like, which is difficult, that even though you have no control over what's going to happen, it's still considered that you haven't finished your action yet until it lands. And if that happens, and even though your knowledge has no effect on the action, it still affects whether you're obligated or not. So that's a little difficult to handle. It doesn't make sense logically, really. Okay, but anyway, that's Rava's interpretation. Rav Ashi Amar, here's the fourth explanation. Classic, when you can't understand the Mishnah, we say it must be missing words, and this is the way it should read. Hazorek v'niskal me'achar sheyatzta miyado. You throw it. You remember after it left your hand. Kalta acher o kalta kelev o shenisrafa patur. But hanacha chayav. But if it were to have landed, you'd actually be obligated. Now, here comes the important part. Bameh dvarim amurim b'chazar v'shachach. Okay, now they're adding that it wasn't just that you remembered in the middle, but then by the time it landed, you forgot. Okay, problem number one with this case is that's a really hard case to understand because the reality of it. I can understand I threw it, and even though a very small time passes between the time I throw and the time it lands, still I could understand maybe I'd find out in the middle as it's midair. But to find out in the middle and then forget before it lands is already somewhat difficult, right? So now, but that's Rav Ashi, and he says basically what it means is you remembered, but then forgot. If it lands, and then it goes back to what I said earlier. When it said tchilatan v'sofan, does it mean the whole time it has to be shogeg? Or according to Rav Ashi now, he's going to say, as long as the beginning was shogeg and the end was shogeg, you were unwitting at those parts. It doesn't matter that in the middle you were mazid, you were intentional about it, you knew about it. Doesn't matter. As long as the beginning and the end, that's considered shogeg. Okay, so then you'd be chayav in that case. Avalosh chazar v'shachach patur. But if you didn't remember, if you didn't forget, you remembered in the middle that it was Shabbat, but you didn't forget again, then you'd be patur. Why? Okay, so again, the Gemara doesn't raise issues, but what's the problem? First of all, he puts together line number 3 in the Mishnah and line number 1 in the Mishnah, and he ignores the Chabura case in the middle. It almost sounds like there's one continuum without the Chabura in the middle. It kind of doesn't relate to that one. Number 2, we said it's not likely that such a case would happen. And number 3, which is going to connect to our next sugya, which is there's a concept, I'll already explain it to you now, which is there's a machloket, is there a yidi'ah l'chatzi shiur? We've seen this before. Let's say I'm writing. That's going to be the classic case. I'm writing a letter. You write 2 letters, you're obligated. Let's say I write 1 letter. I find out, it's Shabbat and it's either I forgot it was Shabbat or I forgot it was forbidden to write. And then I say, oh, I didn't realize. Then I forget and I write a 2nd letter. Is that yedi'ah in the middle? Because the yedi'ah was only on a chatzi shiur. I'm not obligated if I write 2 letters. So I'm not obligated a sacrifice. So maybe that yedi'ah is viewed as if it's nothing. So if I then go and I write unwittingly a 2nd letter, do we connect those 2? Now, if we connect the 2 writings of the letters, then we say you're always obligated, and remember the wording, if you do it be'elem echad. Elem echad means 1 lack of knowledge. So if we say, since you didn't have a yedi'ah for whole action, then we view it as if there's no yedi'ah. That would be called ein yedi'ah l'chatzi shiur. There's no such thing. So we view the yedi'ah as if it never happened, which means that in the end, what do you have? 1 letter and another letter. Both were unwitting. We put it together and you're obligated to bring a korban. If we say yesh yedi'ah l'chatzi shiur, we count that as you knew. You found out, you knew. That breaks those 2 actions. So when you later write your 2nd letter, you're not going to be obligated a korban chatat because the yedi'ah, even though it wasn't enough to make you bring a sacrifice, it was enough to say we're splitting these 2 actions, and therefore you wouldn't be obligated. So according to Rav Ashi, he's going to basically say that even though you were mazid in the middle, it doesn't break, right? So he would have to say that our Mishnah is holding ein yedi'ah l'chatzi shiur, right? That doesn't break up anything, and we can therefore view you as unwitting from the shogeg at the beginning and the shogeg at the end. Because again, Yakir and Hanacha happen with the yedi'ah break in the middle. So he would have to side on one side of that machloket, which it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not so clear that that's that's the case. So because of that, it's also a difficulty in his interpretation. And now we're going to move on to this yedi'ah issue. Now we're talking about the last line in the Mishnah, or the last section about the general principle. Itmar. Now they bring in another machloket. Shte amot b'shogeg, shte amot b'mizid, shte amot b'shogeg. You throw an item 6 amot, or you pass an item. We're actually going to see there's a debate about whether this is passing or throwing. Whatever it is, you're passing at 6 amot in Reshut Rabim. But the first 2 amot, you were shogeg about it. The next 2 amot, you were mazid. And the last 2 amot, you were shogeg again. So now, right, so you were intentional in the middle. And what's the important part here? When you got to 4 amot, which is when you're obligated, you were actually mazid. Okay, it wasn't like just in the middle there while it was in midair passing over amot number 3, let's say, the 3rd cubit. But when it gets to the 4th cubit, which is the moment you're actually obligated, you were mazid. You were intentional about it, so maybe you wouldn't be obligated. On the other hand, what happened here? Well, first of all, there was a yediyah l'chatzi shiur. Maybe we don't view it as a yediyah, and because it was only for 2 amot. And the second thing is, right, because you did 2 amot in the beginning, which is not a whole whole action. The other issue is that if you take the 2 in the beginning and the 2 in the end you have 4 amot that you passed it through where you were unwitting about it. So maybe you should be obligated. So that's going to be a question. Machloket Rabba and Abaye. Rabba and Rava. Rabba Amar Patur, Rava Amar Chayav. Okay, so Rabba with a Hey says you're exempt. Rava with an Aleph says you're obligated. So why? Rabba Amar Patur, why does Rava think you're exempt? Because he says like this. Afilu leRabban Gamliel, Amar ein yediyah l'chatzi shiur. Even according to the opinion that when it comes to writing, we don't view that a yediyah splits up the 2 shkagot if it's only half a maaseh. So since you had a yediyah that you passed something 2 amot accidentally in Reshut Rabim, that's only knowledge about a half an act because you're not obligated for 2 amot. So we don't, even according to Rabban Gamliel, who doesn't view that as significant, and therefore theoretically you would think that we combine the 2 amot and the 2 amot, which mean in the 2, right, the number 1 to 2 amot and number 5 and 6. And then you'd end up with 4 amot altogether. But he wouldn't say that here. Why? When you finished writing 2 letters, at that point you were shogeg at the end, when you actually did the malacha. But here when you got to 4 amot, and that's when you're obligated, well, you were mazid, you were intentional. So therefore, then we're going to say we can't combine these 2 shogegs. Now, according to him, what must be the scenario here? Remember, I told you it's not clear. Are you throwing or are you walking and carrying it in your hand? So now we say, Ubemai, Ibizorek, Shogeghu. When you're Zorek, when you actually obligated, not when it passes through the airspace of 4 amot, and at that moment you were mazid, you knew it was forbidden. No, the action happens when it actually lands on the ground. That's at 6 amot. So at that point, you're only obligated at the end, and you should really be obligated because of your shogeg. Ela b'ma'avir. So Rabba must be talking about b'ma'avir, when you're actually carrying it. Why? Because when you're carrying it, and if you get to amot number 3 and they tell you, do you know it's forbidden, and you continue on and you keep walking, and you get to amot number 4, when you get to amot number 4, there was intentionality about it. And therefore, we're going to say we don't put the 2 shkagot together. So according to Rabba, number 1, you're exempt. Number 2, we're talking about a case where you're carrying it and not that you threw it. Rava, there's a mistake here. It should say Rava. Rava Amar Chayav. Rava says you're obligated. Why? Now he says the reverse. Afilu l'Rabbanan da'amra yesh yediyah l'chatzi shiur. Even the rabbis who hold that a yediyah breaks things up, that won't be in our case. Why? Hatamhu debiyado. That's a case where what happens, again, you started writing a letter, you found out it was forbidden, and you continue anyway. So there we say, yesh yediyah l'chatzi shiur, that yediyah was significant. Now you picked up and started doing another act. We're going to say that's different, right? That breaks it up, and you're not going to be obligated because you intentionally did something. Aval hacha kevan de'ein biyado lo. But here we don't view it as breaking anything up because really, this goes back to where we started, the whole act happened the moment you threw it. The moment you threw it was all that really matters here. And in the end, you passed it more than 4 amot because it left your hands and you had no control over it after that. So the yediyah doesn't break anything because in the end, that yediyah is totally irrelevant. It's as if nothing happened because everything happened, right? It's an interesting thing. Then a time continuum, theoretically everything happened before it actually happened, because as soon as it left your hands, it was obvious where it was going, and there was no way to stop it. So now, obviously he must be talking about zorek, because if you're carrying it, obviously it is in your control. Now what happens in the end? So he says you're obligated, and it's talking about a case where you threw. So in the end, there's really no machloket, Rava and Rava, because one thinks the case is ma'avir, and one thinks the case is zorek. So theoretically, they would both agree with each other if they were actually talking about the same case. Amar Rabba, zarat benacha b'pi kelev o b'pi kivshan chayav. Rava says now, or is it Rava? Yeah, it should say Rava. Rava says, often Rava and Rava get confused because when the scribes would write the Gemara, they would write Resh Bet Chukchik, right, with a little line, and they would shorten it. Because of that, often Rava and Rava get very confused and actually lived at the same time. The difference is they're actually, Rava is the generation above Rava. They often do argue, but often based on the context, they can figure out which one it was who said it, or based on other statements of them. Anyway, there's always a lot of corrections about them. So Amar Rava, Zarach v'nacha b'fi kelev o b'fi kivshan chayav. If you throw it and it lands on a dog or in a furnace, you're obligated. This is really strange. Didn't our Mishnah say you're not obligated? So that's what the Gemara asks. But doesn't the Mishnah say kal ta'acher o kal ta'kelev o shenisrifa patur? So what are the answer? Hatam delo machavin, ha dekam machavin. There's two ways you could throw something to a dog. You could be having a catch with the dog, and you could intend for it to go exactly where the dog is. Now, I did mention frisbee catch in the Mishnah, but what they're going to say really is the Mishnah is talking about where you threw it and you didn't intend it to go to the dog, and the dog just jumps up and catches it. Or turns out there's a furnace there and maybe you didn't realize, or you didn't aim well enough. Then you're not going to be obligated. But if you wanted to throw it specifically into the furnace, I was thinking of those people who, try to throw up food and catch it in their mouths, right? Like you're trying to intend for it to go exactly there, then, right, into the mouth of the dog, right? Some people play tricks, right? They throw it to a dog and the dog jumps up and catches it. So if you were intending specifically that, then you're obligated, because that's intentionality. That's what you wanted to happen. Okay, and because you wanted it to happen, that's called alechem machshevet, and you'll be obligated. Again, assuming it was unwitting, you didn't know it was forbidden to do that or something like that. So now, Amar Rabbi Bar Abaye af ananami tanina. I'm going to prove this from the following source. Yesh ochel achila achat. It's a Mishnah in Kritut. I think it's a Mishnah. Yesh ochel achila achat v'chayav aleh arba chataot v'asham achad. Okay, the Gemara likes to do this. They say sometimes you could do one act and be obligated many sacrifices. There's actually debates about whether you could actually be obligated or not. This obviously thinks you can. You could be obligated 5 sacrifices, 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. How so? Hatameh, let's say you're impure. Sha'achal chelev, you ate forbidden fats. V'hu notar min hamukdashim, it happened to be left over beyond the designated time. All sacrifices have a certain amount of time in which you can eat them. And you ate it anyway. Remember, the chelev is supposed to be burned on the altar. If you didn't burn it in the proper time, it's called notar. It's forbidden to eat that. It's forbidden to eat the chelev in any case. It's also forbidden to eat notar. So you have an additional. It's also b'Yom Kippurim. It's forbidden to eat on Yom Kippurim. And Rabbi Meir Omer, afim ma'itash Shabbat v'hotzio b'fiv chayav. So let's go through all the things you're obligated before we even get to Rabbi Meir. So number 1, you're tameh and you ate something that was sanctified because the chelev was from a sacrifice. So number 1, if you're impure and you eat something that was sanctified, you have to bring a chatat. Again, we're assuming all this is unwitting. Next thing, you ate chelev. Chelev is forbidden fat. You're not allowed to eat that, even if it's not a sacrifice. Number 3, it was notar, which you're not allowed to eat. Number 4, it was Yom Kippur. You're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. Number 5, the asham is because you were benefited from something that was sanctified, hekdesh. So that's it. Rabbi Meir says if it was Shabbat and you took it out in your mouth, you were eating it as you walked out from the private domain to the public domain, or the reverse, then you're going to be obligated another chatat. Okay. Now, first of all, something very interesting. Why on Yom Kippur aren't you chayav? You're allowed to carry on Yantif, but you're not allowed to carry on Yom Kippur. So they explained here, they must be that Rabbi Meir doesn't think that it's forbidden to carry on Yom Kippur, because he says only if it was Shabbat would you be obligated, which is interesting. It's an interesting approach. Right? We don't paskin that way, but he must have held that way. Amrulo, Ein Omen Hashem. They say, you might be right But that's not the type of things they were talking about. They were talking about the eating of the hekdesh, the eating itself, and not carrying while eating. So you're right that it would be another one, but they just weren't mentioning that in the Mishnah. Vamai. So now we go back to this concept. They both seem to agree that you would be obligated hotzah. It's just a matter of should it have been mentioned in the Mishnah or not. So they say, why would you be obligated? Ha'ein derech hotzah b'kach. This isn't a normal way of doing things. You don't normally carry by having something in your mouth. Ella, so what do they say? Since you obviously had intention that you wanted to take it out, and you wanted it to be outside, and you wanted to eat it outside, and the way you took it outside was by eating it, and while you're eating it, you're taking it outside. That shows that since you intended for it, you're actually going to be obligated. Hachanami, likewise in our case, likewise in our case, since you intended for the dog to catch it, that's considered hotzah. So just like if I walk out carrying it in my mouth, I could be obligated for carrying from reshut to reshut. Likewise here, I could be obligated if the dog catches it in his mouth. With that, we finished Hadran ala Chazorek, moving on to the 12th parak. Okay, we're really making progress on this Masechet, already up to the 12th parak and chapter and Daf 102. So we're getting there. Only less than 2 months to the Siyum. Haboneh. And not only that, but we're now moving out of the topic of carrying, and we're moving finally onto the melachot and the different melachot and what are you obligated. Soon we're going to get to writing and a lot of details about writing. For now, we're going to start with building. Haboneh. Kama yivneh v'yeheh chayav. How much are you obligated for building? Building, how big? Again, we need requisite shiur. It's always what's the requisite amount that you're obligated? Haboneh kol shehu. Okay, anything. Any amount, you're bonet, you're going to be obligated. Obviously, the Gemara is going to ask, why is in such a small amount significant? We'll get to that later. Hamisatet, if you chisel stones, that's because they use stones for building. The hamakebet patish, if you, now again, this can be understood probably as, even though we started with bonet, we're now talking about the malach of makebet patish, which is striking the final blow. The last thing you do to make something useful, you render it useful. That's forbidden. Ube ma'atzad, or if you're makeh with a different type of hammer, hakodech, or it could be this is part of building. If you hammer something in, hakodech kolshu, if you drill any amount, chayav, zeh haklal, this is the principle, again, we have this in the Mishnah, kol ha'oseh melacha u'melachto mitkayemet b'Shabbat chayav. If you do an action and it lasts, it's a valid action, it actually does something, and you're obligated. Rashba gomer, af hamakeh bekornus ala sadam b'shat melacha chayav v'pnei shu kimetaken melacha. If you bang with your cornice, this type of hammer that they would use on the sadan. The sadan is the workspace. When you usually hammer, you hammer on some hard surface. You can look it up online. You can find it. I googled cornice b'sadan or boneh b'sadan, and you can find pictures of an implement that this looks like. If you hammer on it, then, thank you, Ruth, an anvil. If you hammer with this while you're doing your melacha, it sounds like if you hammer on the surface itself, not necessarily on the kli, or maybe it means you hammer on the utensil while it's on the sadan, then you're chayav because you're mitakeh melacha. It's like you're fixing your implement, your utensil. Okay, we'll get back to that more later. Kol shehu l'may chasya. So the Gemara asks, what is kol shehu valuable for? Why, if you build a little bit, what's the significance? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, sheken ani chofer guma latzniya ba prutotav. So he says a poor person has a little bit of money is important to a poor person. So what will he do? He'll dig a little hole in the ground in his house, and he'll put his money there. So that's already binyan kol shehu. If you remember, we learned that if you dig a hole, if you dig it in a field, then it's chayav mishum choresh, plowing. But if you dig it in your house, remember the floors were dirt in their houses. If you dig it in your house, it's mishum boneh, building in your house. So therefore, if an ani, that's something minimal that a person does that would be considered building, because he makes a little hole to hide his money. So what's the case? What's the parallel in the Mishkan? Again, it always has to fit into our criteria. It has to be something they did in the Mishkan. So what do they say? What did they do in the Mishkan? And we keep going back. Anytime we want to find something little, what do they always go back to? The needles, because the needles were small. And if you did something with the needles, it would be something very small. The ones who sewed the curtains, they put, to protect their needles, they put them under the ground, so they dig a little hole to put it in the ground. Abai Amar, that's a ridiculous answer. You wouldn't put your needles in the ground gets wet, absorbs moisture, that'll cause them to get rusty. Certainly wouldn't want to do that. Ella, he gives a different example. What would a poor person do, or what would someone in the Mishkan do? And here he says a poor person. Shekain ani, he says it's not, okay, we're now erasing everything we said. It's not that a poor person digs a hole. That's not really a malacha that we would find like something like that in the Mishkan. But let's give a different example. What else would an ani do anyway? We always keep going back to the poor person because that's someone who would build something very small. A poor person doesn't have a lot of food, so they use a small pot. To use a small pot, if you want to create a fire underneath, you need to raise it a little bit. So you create a very small tripod. He might build a very small tripod to put some twigs and stuff underneath to cook up his little pot. That's something a poor person would do. That's called binyan b'mashu. So now they have to find a parallel in the Mishkan. What would be a parallel? Let's say you make a big pot of the dye, and then you run out, and you have just a little bit more to color. So what are you going to do in the Mishkan? What do you think they did? They probably put up a little fire with just a little bit and cooked up, a small amount of these herbs to make the dye. And therefore, we're going to say, or whatever, sometimes it was the herbs, sometimes it was other things, but in any case, they're going to basically use a small pot just to finish up if they need a small amount. So here's an interesting reaction. Rav Acha bar Yaakov amar, ein aniyut b'mkom hashirut. No way did they do that in the Mishkan. Everything in the Mishkan was done bigadol, big, okay? The Mishkan, nothing, there's no aniyut b'mkom hashirut. The Mishkan is a place of wealth. Okay, remember all the gold? We talked about this just the other day, about how there's always this pull between. Some sugiyot talk about a Torah chasal mamonan shel Yisrael. The Torah doesn't want people to have to spend money unnecessarily, and even in the Mishkan. On the other hand, we have this issue that we want everything to be glorified in the Mishkan. And they go to the extent to say they don't do anything small. They would never cook up a very small pot. They would always do a lot of dye, and they'll use it for the next time. Nothing's done small in the Mishkan. That means ein aniyut b'mkom hashirut, in a place where there's wealth, and there would never be anything like a poor person would do, and therefore that can't be it. So now we're still stuck with, well, what's a binyan kol shehu? Ela shekein bal habayit sheyesh lo nekev b'birato v'sotmo. Let's say you have a hole in your wall. This is classic, right? You move out of an apartment and you have all the, you put stuff in the wall. They always make you close up all the holes where you left something. So you have a little hole in the wall. You want to fix it up. That's binyan kol shehu, because that's something you would do in your house. Kavateka be mishkan. So where did they do this in the Mishkan? Sheken keresh shetafla bo darna. You had one of the beams of the Mishkan that had a worm got into it and it rotted. Matif l'tocha avar. You would put in it lead v'sotmo and you would close it up. That's binyan b'mashu that they did in the Mishkan. Amar Shmuel. Now we're moving on to another thing. Ha-mitzadeda to Evan chayav. Shmuel says if you place a stone in its place, you're obligated, even if you don't put cement in to keep it in place. So meitive, they say, well, how could you say that? There's a braita that says, echad notena to Evan, v'echad notena to ti. Now normally, if everyone does half a malacha, you're not obligated. So let's say one person put the stone in, one person put the cement on. Hanotena tatit chayav. We ignore the person who put the stone. That's not even an action at all. It's the person who put the cement who's obligated. So what do you see? It's the cement that's important, not putting the stone in its place. So now they say to him, they answer the question. They say that's not a question because look at the rest of that braita. Even if he puts it on the top row and he puts just a row, or he puts one stone on the top row without cementing it in, he's still going to be obligated. So therefore, you can't say you have to cement it in to be obligated. Even the Braita said that. So therefore, what must it be? Elatata binyane habi. There's three types of rows of stones. Tata, mitzia, ve'ila. There's the bottom, there's the middle, and there's the top. Tata, the bottom one, bait sidude va'afra. In order to be obligated for the bottom row, you have to put it in its place and put kind of some dirt around it. Mitzia, but without using the cement or the mortar. Mitzia, the middle row, baina mitina. You need the mortar, otherwise, what's going to happen in the middle row? It needs to be cemented in. Otherwise, now here we're going to see what the otherwise is. When you want to build on top of it, right? The bottom row is kind of in the dirt. Then the middle row goes on top, and it's already less stable. And if you want to put stones on top, it's going to fall unless you really cement it in. But the top one, that's the second part of the Braita, where it said you could just put on the top row. There, since there's nothing above it, it doesn't actually need to be cemented in. We're not so worried they're going to fall. Okay, so that was all to explain Shmuel, who said Mitzadet to Evan Chayav. He must have been talking about only the bottom row. Then you'll be obligated even without the mortar. Hamisatet, if you chisel the stones. Misatet b'shumay mechayev. Rav amar mishum bonet, u'Shmuel amar mishum makebet patish. We're now going to see 3 cases where they disagree, and this leads to this big debate about what exactly they disagree about, why they have this big disagreement. Are you obligated in all these 3 actions because of building or because of putting on the final blow? If you put a hole, meaning you have a chicken coop and it's closed and you want to open it to allow for airflow. So Rav amar mishum boneh, Shmuel amar mishum makebet patish. Ayel shufta b'kupina demara. If you put a peg into the head of the what do you call it? The handle. You want to stick the handle into place in this hoe, and you put the peg in to keep it in place. Rav amar mishum boneh, u'Shmuel amar makebet patish. Now people go crazy at Rav because Rav seems to say there's binyan b'kelim, and there's a big machloket, and in fact, Rabbeinu Hananel thinks that the machloket here between them is, do we have binyan b'kelim or not? We talked about this before. If you build a utensil, or if you, we'll talk about this in a minute, what exactly binyan b'kelim means. If you fix a utensil, let's say, is that considered binyan, or is binyan only something that you do structural, right? A house, something more serious, but a kli, which is metaltalin, right? It's something movable. Maybe there's no binyan. So it seems that according to Rabbeinu Hananel, that's the machloket. Shmuel says it's not binyan, it's makebet patish. Rav seems to think it's binyan, which sounds like Rav thinks yesh binyan b'kelim. Some people say no. Even Rav thinks ain't binyan b'kelim, but there's a debate between what binyan b'kelim means, maybe fixing up. But if you actually build a kli from start to finish, and here you're building it, you're putting it together, that actually could be considered binyan, even by kelim, even if you hold ain't binyan b'kelim. Okay, so there's a whole big debate about it. I'm just kind of mentioning it very minorly here. Utsricha, why did you need to know that they argue in all 3 cases? By the way, what's the relevance of knowing whether it's binyan or makebet patish? First of all, when you get warned, you have to be warned in order to be obligated for doing it intentionally and get stoned. Someone has to say, do you know that it's forbidden? And they have to explain why it's forbidden. So if they give you the wrong malacha, then you're not obligated. Number 2, if you did a tolada of that same av malacha, right? Let's say you did a few toladot, then you would, again, depending on which one it was, would make you obligated more sacrifices or not. Utsricha, why do you need all 3? The first case of the stones. Now the stones are actually used for building. That's how you build a house, you put stones. So you might have thought, there, that's the normal way of building. Just opening up a hole in a wall is not normally the way you build, although we'll see in a minute, maybe they say it is, but it's less binyan than getting the stones ready. Maybe they'd agree that it's only makebet patish. And if you just had the lul shel tarnagolim and the stones, you might have thought at least opening up a hole in the wall for the lul, the chicken coop, is very similar to building. Just like you might open up a window in a house, same thing. But that already is just a utensil, and there you might have thought and therefore maybe Rav would say it's only putting the final blow. Maybe they'd agree with Shmuel. And now, so then they say, okay, well, why don't you just say that one? And then we know that in all of them, Rav says binyan. You might have thought, though, what about Shmuel? You might have thought only baha kamar Shmuel. If you only have the last case, you might have thought in that case, that's where Shmuel holds as makebet patish. And then you can go back to the beginning, right, and say, in all those, Shmuel might say, oh, maybe those are binyan. And therefore, it's shricha. That's why you need it. Last line for today. What's wrong with chiseling these stones? What's the malacha? Mechavele, achvele biyade. He showed him with his hands. Mishum makebe patish. He did an action of hammering. He showed him with his hands, but that's makebe patish. So then they say, wait a minute. How can you say it's makebe patish? Doesn't it say in our Mishnah, hamisatet v'hamakebe patish, one who chisels, and then it says, and makebe patish, and strikes the final blow, which sounds like it's not makebe patish. So they say now, ema hamisatet hamakebe patish. The misatet is a makebe patish, and that's why he's obligated. Okay, and that's what that will end for today. We'll finish up more with binyan tomorrow and some other melachot, and then we'll get to the topic that's going to go for the next few pages about writing on Shabbat. We'll get into letters and all sorts of interesting things.